welcome to the No Plan B podcast. I'm Jean Fallacara, your host, and today we are going to talk about science with Ian Mitchell. Ian is the founder of Wizard Science. He's behind a lot of projects, some supplement for anti-aging, longevity, some others for brain optimization, sport optimization. He worked with the NASA. He's behind a lot of projects. He's this fantastic type of scientist that you can listen for hours and discover and talk about so many aspects of the beauty of his humanity. So let's get him on board and start the talk. Yeah.
Jean, how you doing?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing well. Great to meet you in person.
Absolutely. Same here. I was waiting for this moment for a very long time, actually, in talking and watching everything you've been doing. And it was like, you're a scientist. So,
yeah, rumor has it. Yeah.
That's for me, it's like important. And I love the biohacking community. I have a lot of respect for every single biohackers. But when it comes to the end and in space, people with science like you, it gets another dimension. And
agreed. It's interesting though on that front because I work with a lot of different groups like Lila Cube and the guys at Lila. The stuff that we're doing over there, it's so on the cutting edge. It's all quantum biology is actually what we're doing. And we were just doing, I don't think Philip would mind me saying this, we were just doing some experiments a week ago. And we got the data sets back and it was controlled, double-blinded. But in looking at the data, because we did it at a university, so I had one of the professors there, plate cells, set everything up. I was kind of double-blinding it, taking pictures of just the isolated cells. And we did everything in quadruplicate because this was the third time we've done this experiment, but it is seemingly so bizarre that I wanted to make sure we had just done it ad nauseum, because when we write a paper on this, it's going to raise a lot of eyebrows. So basically the experiment was we plated a bunch of cells in quadruplicate from two different cell lines. Then we took a picture of them. Then I had the, it's called the quantum upgrade program, but it's kind of like putting something in a quantum block 10,000 miles away. And without fail, on every single one of these, the ATP output jumped, and this is remarkable, truly, over 20%. And it was kind of a, what? Yeah, I know. That's the thing, right? Like, in terms of cellular biology and just kind of, the mitochondrial output and health, that's insane.
It is remarkable. Yeah. But I think, go ahead. But, this is the thing. I believe that science of today and scientists of today are just not ready to understand the principle of these things because our brain has not been conditioned to understand them. And when this guy got the Nobel Prize for the quantum physics and the entanglement, you look at it and like, okay, that doesn't make that much sense. And Einstein was saying exactly the same thing, was like, it doesn't make any sense. It's not understandable. But at the end of the day, I think we're heading to that. And I'm a true believer in quantum physics in general and quantum energy. Definitely into it.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Well, especially now, after having done all of these experiments, it is kind of incontrovertible. I mean, the data's there. It's bizarre to look at in the sense of, like you said, we're not conditioned to think that way, right? Science historically has been very mechanistic, procedural. The body is a machine, and that kind of thing. When in reality, as you well know, I mean, neuroplasticity is something that can, just be everywhere if you work towards that as a goal. Historically, we were told, no new neurons. That's just the way it works.
You're gonna die down. We need that neuron.
You're going to die dumb. Yeah, that's kind of the sad way of putting it. I'm so sorry about your brain. Yeah, but now that we know, you can enhance BDNF and do all those sorts of things. I mean, it's just the way things are headed. And I said this a couple of days ago to a friend, and it really rang true to me. Is the data is very much in. We are actually far more a thought than a thing. Even though, and I always tell people this, you never actually touch someone. You're just pushing against electron clouds. So it's just a repellent interaction from similar electron clouds. And those are the forces that are expressed. But truly, we're not actually touching. And so when you break it down, we're 99.99999% open space, and we're all just vibrating things that are probabilistically interacting. It kind of gives you this kind of, wow, definitely not a machine.
Yeah. But it's interesting because, many people are like you said before, they're like, but when you talk on a very grounded level and you explain people like, okay, you're walking in the street, you cross somebody for a reason, you don't know, but you have a certain attraction to that person or something's happened. You turn your head and you are like, oh, something's bizarre. So that meaning is recognized, but it's an extension of these.
Well, I think Rupert Sheldrake, actually, who was a really good biologist, probably the preeminent biologist in the 70s for plant biology and genetics, he's done a tremendous amount of experimental data and very conclusively showed that things are linked, and whether you call it, as he does, morphogenic fields or morphic resonance, or, you could say it's kind of extrasensory phenomenon. It's really, with the 2022 Nobel Prize, for Bell's theorem, it does demonstrably show that things are far more connected. What's also humorous to me is, if you subscribe to the idea of everything kind of coming forth from the Big Bang, the way that you would entangle particles is exactly that. So at its most fundamental essence, at one point, we were all effectively entangled. And I think you can see the outcroppings of that now, because I don't know anybody who's had the experience of walking into a room and feeling nothing. Everybody walks into a room and you can feel the interaction from people.
He said, energy there. It's true.
And I think even at a distance, we've proven it. It's very demonstrable. It's one of the things that, and you may have seen this video on stage with Todd Shipman that we did at the Biohacking conference, where we took someone, he had a horrible shellfish allergy, and we just put crab meat, which he reacted to on one arm when we derma rolled it, histamine reaction, swelling, hives, the whole 9 yards. We put it in a quantum block for a couple minutes, negated the waveforms to make it constructive interference instead of destructive interference, and then did the same thing on his other arm. 3 minutes later, no reaction, right? Which just tells us that as far as science has progressed right now, if you run a spectroscopic analysis, like if I take a gas chromatograph and I assess something, it tells me this is the shape of your box. It does not tell me what's inside the box.
No.
And that's what I'm really excited about, is where we're going. Even though we don't have the answers and I can't find the answers in a book, that's what excites me, is that it's not all something that's prescriptive. I don't know. It's not all delineated. You can't move with the answer and go, dear Google, what are the effects of quantum biology? What are the quantum biological interactions?
Well, you know what? With the rise of artificial intelligence, you may get an answer on that if you ask Google.
I could probably hit up ChatGPT and get some pretty good answers. So actually, interestingly, I was meeting with the head of cognitive, or the former head of cognitive neuroscience at DARPA last week. She was one of the program managers there. And we were talking, and she has, of course, from DARPA, has access to a lot of things that we don't. And she was mentioning one of her friends who's using ChatGPT-4 on a closed network for us. And I said, well, how is it? And she said, frightening. It's like,
it is.
Oh, it's so far ahead of the curve. It makes ChatGPT look like it's standing still.
Yeah, it's impressive. But, this is the thing. When you were talking about chromatography and protocols and science from the past, look at it. You're a scientist. How was science before? You design an environment in which you try an experiment. Now, the environment is not fixed anymore. So we're changing the whole rules of how science has to be proven. And even when any protocol or any principle of science is proven, the goal of science is to disrupt that. Say new things and to question it, that to put it in another other perspective. So this is exactly what you're doing now.
Yes. That's it. I always told my students that science is a point on a line. And the best science that we have today, 1,000 years from now, will seem absolutely silly. You know,
Yes.
I mean, if you look at the science from 400 years ago, it's just from our perspective, remarkable and hilarious. Like some of the things you go, wow. But the reality is you have to take the little morsels and the little diamonds in the rough and go, okay, it's kind of standing on the shoulders of giants. You build on those people. Like one of the things I work with a lot is carbon nanoparticles, the buckyballs, the lipofullerenes, and I actually became friends with one of the three guys who got the Nobel Prize for that, because I had reached out to him just to say thank you, because I was able to do a lot of things. And I'm acutely aware of the fact that it really is standing on the shoulders of giants. Those guys do some phenomenal work, and then, we'll come in and tinker with it a little bit, and it's an additive phenomenon. So hopefully 1,000 years from now, people will have taken the kind of the silly stuff we're doing now.
Change it down or improve it. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say there's some stuff that I did with one company where we were trying to test for a type of what would be basically electron spin. And, there's a thing called spintronics, which is the storage medium where you use, paired electron spin. And I think that's probably, if you did that in a 3D matrix, that's probably where things are going for storage, because the data storage is off the charts. But either that or just something that's an entirely quantum computing function, which makes a whole lot more sense.
Well, just before you keep going on data, you know what? We're storing a lot of data, but today we're still not using them properly. We're gathering information, but we don't know what to do with it.
Right. We can't. So, well, that's actually to digress, but that is one of the things that's difficult about being a human is we really suck at multivariate systems analysis. You can easily hold 2, 3, 4 kind of things in your head, but when it gets to 20 different things, that's where I think machine learning is so amazing, because once, hopefully we don't get just completely outpaced by AI, but
I don't think so.
I think as long as we can keep the interaction positive, because basically we're building something that should, in theory, at the point of the singularity, completely outpace us on all fronts.
Right.
And that's possible. I mean, Arthur C. Clarke, the sci-fi writer, had this kind of notion that the evolution of consciousness would be inorganic unconscious to organic unconscious to organic conscious, us, to inorganic conscious, AI. And we're very much tracking along those lines.
Yeah, except that we still don't know exactly what is consciousness.
That's true. That's very true. My personal take, I know you've done a lot of neurofeedback work, and I did a huge amount of that when I was a kid because of headaches and things that I was working through, and then did 30 years of pretty diehard meditation.
And you show it.
Yeah, well, it is an interesting thing. I think, I have my own kind of assessment of what consciousness is and is not, but
Tell me.
Well, I think consciousness is basically you can, from the scientific standpoint, you could say it's the field that everything emerges from. And there are lots of experiments that I'm happy to do with you offline, and we can even do them remotely, that are kind of demonstrable, that show that there is a field that ties everything together, that is both sensing and stimulating and manipulating, where you can actually do something here and really get an interaction tangibly, at a very remote location, because it's a non-temporal, non-local phenomenon. And I think that field of awareness permeates everything and connects everything. And that's, to me, consciousness is that expression. It's the expression of connectedness of all things everywhere. It's really similar to describing the Force from Star Wars.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, absolutely. But you're saying these days, you're going to get like enemies from the neuroscience field. Those guys are like, it can be only electrical and not other than that, or biochemical transformed into electrical signal, because everything comes from there. I'm with you on that 100%. I'm a believer in that too, and I think you're right. Now it's
Well, I mean, the thing about science that's great is I think to really do it well, you have to be entirely agnostic about the outcome, right? If the data sets that we had done last week were entirely different, I'd be saying something totally different because I'm not really genuinely concerned with what the outcome is. I'm just concerned that there is an outcome. I isolate something and that moves us a little farther. And then, if I'm not capable of figuring out a good experiment or doing something to move it, then hopefully somebody else will see what I've done and move that forward.
Yeah.
A show that my dad had me watch when I was a little kid that's been my favorite show of all time called Connections. And it was by this British journalist named James Burke. And what it actually did was it would start with an idea that we have in modern society, and then it would trace its roots back hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, and go step by step by step by step, showing how the pathway moved from, say like the Battle of Hastings, right? You go from 1066 all the way forward with a stirrup, and then that arrives at having a nuclear warhead. I mean, it's literally things like that, but it's almost different now, and it's hard to grasp a little bit because the pace of technology. People used to say that technology is moving exponentially, and I actually don't think that's the case.
No, I don't think so. Yeah.
Yeah. I think technology used to expand seemingly exponentially because the population was actually going in a geometric growth.
Exactly.
We're getting data points along a geometric expansion. Now it's as if we've added a third axis because there's so much communication that it is able to move. So you have this kind of what used to be just a graphic thing. Now it's actually a volumetric function. And, you have that whole new axis. You're seeing so much more. I mean, which can be a bit daunting, but it's also just absolutely exciting.
It is exciting because we have access to so much more data information and everything about whatever you're trying to study or to research on. Of course, people outside of the science field can consider it as like technology in general or science goes at futuristic pace. But if you can work in a lab like you do, you know that it's not always the case. Like some days or some weeks, you're going to be stuck on the same experiment and it doesn't go the right way.
Yeah, actually, I would be inclined to say it's kind of like baseball. You're an all-star if you get 3 out of 10.
Yeah.
And that's actually probably pretty fitting. Maybe even 2 out of 10. A lot of times things just fail. Most of the guys that I work with here, they think, that I'm doing all these things that are really great, but the reality is I'm failing so much, so fast, so often. It's almost kind of like that, the business approach of fail fast, fail often.
Exactly, and learn from it and move forward. And that's exactly it. But you're in both side actually, business and science.
Yeah, I am. And honestly, nowadays, I think that's actually a better place to be because I have a lot of friends that are just purely academic, and some of the people where I used to teach, that's all they do, right? And they're wholly dependent on, say, NIH grants or and OCAST grants. And there are a lot of times, like case in point, one of my partners and I, we submitted a grant. He's PhD biochemist at the university where I used to work, and we submitted a grant, and it was for a cancer thing that we had developed, and it was great, like really worked well. And we had mice with tumors, and then the same mice without the tumors. And we had, a really good write-up. And this made us both kind of upset because we submitted everything, and the review board said, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't matter if it makes sense. You have animals with tumors, then you have the same animals fixed. I don't know everything. That's the point of doing the science. But when you see something like that, that's a data set that makes you scratch your head. It's kind of incumbent upon you as a good scientist to pull the thread, right? And so now, because I'm not in academia and I actually am in the private sector doing things, I'm not beholden to people to do solely what I get research funding to do, which is actually fantastic because there are so many, I genuinely, I can't tell you how many times I've read research and gone, oh my God, this is brilliant. And then it stops. It's kind of like, da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
and they're literally so close. They're actually on the cancer thing we did. There was a joint research team between Japan and Germany who was tracking the same sort of thing we were doing, except they were ahead of us, and their research was great. I mean, it was brilliant. And then they just went totally radio silent. And I have no doubt that it's because, a postdoc left to take a position, or their grant funding dried up or something like that. But it really impinges the ability of scientists to progress things and move it forward when you're entirely beholden on what you can get grant funding to do, right? It shouldn't be like that.
There should be shouldn't be like that. But it's the shift is getting there, because I see many scientists that are successful in business as well, and they shifting to business, and they're backed up by businesses as well, because we don't have to hide our face or to put a mask on, but science drives big business, discovery and stuff like that, because you always have a commercialization phase of it. So now venture capitalists and equity guys, they understood that if you put a bit of money behind scientists that are really working hard on something, you can get multiple. So you see those big firms that were first only in pharma before, now jumping into R&D, science, technology, different field. So it's getting there. And this is why people are thinking that technology goes fast. It's not going faster. It's just getting more fast.
Yeah, no, you're entirely right. There are two different groups that I work with that are venture capital firms. One is Satori Neuro. That's the former DARPA lead programmer, program lead at DARPA. And then the other is called Ecliptic Capital out of Austin. And they do a lot of quantum computing and all sorts of stuff. But it's all sorts of science. And these guys they've made the connection and gone, God, the future is in the technology. Let's see. And interestingly enough, those firms are great because, like Satori Neuro, they'll invest in seed rounds and they'll invest in Series C. Doesn't matter if it's a huge company or a small company, as long as they see an indication that something is moving in a positive direction and it's going to make a wave, they'll get behind it.
Yeah, I like that. And there is this new biohacking funds as well that is ramping up. These guys are like on something interesting as well.
Yeah, they're actually two of my friends, Serena Poon and Dave Sinclair, have a company, and they were just talking to me about probably the same fund that's ramping up in some very large numbers that are they're actually just going around and starting to gobble up a lot of different companies, which is great.
Yeah,
because if real business people put a lot of funding behind real scientists, you're going to see some big changes.
I agree. I agree on that.
I think at a societal level too, because there are a lot of us who are, my thing is when I opened my lab, I literally wrote 6 things on my board that
I was jumping on that, like you're Alice in Wonderland, but in science, like she was saying, like before the morning I do 6 wishes or 6 impossible things, and you have 6 goals before dying. So
yeah. And that's it, and who knows, maybe I've made some good strides on some of them. But it's, the thing is, if you have in my opinion, at least, and this is just my opinion, even if you had, let's say I had solved all 6 of them, if I left them sitting here and didn't get them out to help anyone, what have I really done? My goal was not actually to just solve those. It was to solve them. You can't say you've solved the problem just because you figured it out, right? You've got to get it out. And you have to be able to elicit some kind of engagement from the populace in general and get them moving, because otherwise it's going to fall on deaf ears.
Maybe we can repeat the 6 things that you want to solve for our public, for our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So aging was the first, then cancer, then clean water, free energy, global warming, and superluminal travel, which is just faster than light travel.
Yeah.
And honestly, I made some pretty good strides on the last one, which is a little bit peculiar, but the thing that I'm really kind of coming to find now is I don't think interstellar travel at any great distance actually should be done via engines. I just think it's a really horrible idea.
Yeah, man.
If you clip out at the speed of light and you come back 50 years later, everyone you care about have long since been gone. And that's a really lonely way to travel.
Yeah.
I don't have a playlist that would compensate for that.
No, me neither. And no, I agree. But
Playlist. Yeah.
It's that last 15 years.
Yeah. 50 years of Despondence Playlist 1. Yeah. That really, yeah. I don't want to go down that very path. I actually think something like, wormholes or traversing things because since we're now very clearly showing that tangible physical things have non-local effects, well, it seems to me that the natural outcropping of that, kind of the extension of that thought is,
Correct.
well, you have an effect on something in a non-local capacity. Why can't we move things in a non-local capacity? Traverse things via, Einstein-Rosen bridges and just kind of go from point to point. I think the technology is doable. I don't know how to do it, but that's the kind of stuff that I love that though. I'm really, really happy that there's still a whole lot more that I absolutely have no clue on than I do know.
Yeah, some people think that it's going to be through some sort of avatar that you're going to be able to travel through long distances and stuff like that and get the information back to you like some sort of feedback loop.
Well, I do think just based on the experiments that I've seen in terms of entanglement, if you were able to get the avatar to that place, you could certainly do that, right? You could set up some sort of neural network and do something like that. I think actually it's very much in its infancy, but there are little components of that, like Neuralink and things like that, and then some of the different quantum entanglement companies and quantum computing companies. I can see this sort of the little underpinnings of what that might evolve to be, but we still have the problem of how do you get said avatar 50 million miles away?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Like
it's faster bicycles.
That's it. Yeah. So we go against the principle. It's not the journey that counts.
Yeah.
Now it counts.
Yeah, it counts. Well, I'd very much like to be able to talk to the people that I love on the other end of the trip.
Yeah. That's the thing about cancer. There's a lot of new advances in cancer. Like when you look at the CAR T cell and all these new technologies, and even the that thing called PPAC, I think. We're getting there. We're getting to cure that cancer. Yeah.
I don't actually think that by the time my lifespan is over, I don't think cancer will be a thing anymore. I think someone will have solved that. If they have already, I mean, the way the medical system works, unfortunately, is that literally somebody could have the cure for that right now, and it would take them, roughly 10 to 15 years and $1.125 billion to get it pushed through the FDA so that we could actually see people getting the benefits of it.
It's a pity. It was faster for COVID, but
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the jury is still out a little bit in terms of, should you race that quickly?
Not. And then they go like, I don't have any more founding. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah. Again, luckily, I don't worry about that in a sense because you can't you can't be constantly worried about where the funding is going to come from, or you're tickled.
No, you're worrying on that.
Not able to do honest work,
Yeah.
And there are a lot of things. In truth, though, even the same principle kind of applies to what I do because, a lot of the research I'm doing are on products that I'm developing. And the reason I'm doing the research is...
Let's talk about that, because you have so many projects ongoing and you've done so many, like the C60, to brain, ozone in a pill. Please,
Oh, sure. Let's see. Okay, so let's say start with C60. So carbon 60 is still probably my favorite. It's the one that it's my go-to, right? Ozone serves a great purpose. It's really good for your GI system, especially in the capacity in which I did it, because it amps up the signal strength a little bit. You get kind of a more pronounced impact through a smaller, it's kind of like the minimum effective dose goes down, it's fractional as compared to what it would have been. But that's something that you don't necessarily need to do on a regular basis. The C60, I really hope that it gets out more and more, because everything I've seen about it is just remarkable, and not in its kind of nascent form. If you take the powder, I I saw some studies and someone was citing a study saying, oh my God, it's carcinogenic. Yeah, if you breathe the powder, sure. If you sand charcoal dust off charcoal briquettes and breathe that, it's a really horrifically bad idea. And if it's smaller and nanoscopic, that's an even worse idea.
Yeah.
It's like anything else, right? In its proper form, it can be great. If used horribly, improperly, in the wrong form, not so good. Like there's some the way I like to do it personally is I take the carbon nanospheres and I bind them to a fat. And the rationale behind that is just that when it's bound to a fat, it's loosely molecularly adducted, so it'll penetrate through a cell membrane. And the cool part is when it penetrates through the cell membrane, the nanosphere delocalizes from the lipid, and then it moves to the mitochondrial membrane in the cell. And and the beauty of using nanoparticles is there's so many of them, and there's so many mitochondria, right? We've got quadrillions of mitochondria, and so if you can get quadrillions of nanoparticles in there and block the oxidative stress load, then you simply upregulate the energy production, right? So your electron transport chain just becomes more efficient. Actually, some of the early studies I had done almost a decade ago now showed that we were getting 18 at the low end and 58.3% at the high end jumps in ATP production, which is fantastic. But what's silly is if you look at it as a wave, it had nothing to do with increasing the energy. It was literally just blocking system loss. And so, good God, these cells, they can be almost 1.5 times as efficient if you just simply block the system loss. And since then, I've done things where I'll take NAD precursors like, and nicotine.
There's a lot going on that now. Yeah.
It's great. Like that kind of stuff I think is really brilliant because you can, if you have something like C60, which for all intents and purposes is a great buffer, you can block systemic loss. But then you take something like, NAD, NMN, NR, even niacinamide, right? It's not as effective, but it's still viable. And you put that into a system, then you block the loss, but you increase the yield. And so you end up with such a robust, energetic profile that your electron transport chain is, almost double in terms of its output. And it's funny because, like, you would probably appreciate this. For people who track their athletic performance, like my favorite guys are CrossFitters, right? Because they have a watt for everything. They have a PR on everything. They know exactly what their metrics are. And those guys are great. And like, actually at this point, a lot of the top CrossFit guys in the world are starting to use this stuff because they know exactly what their numbers were yesterday. And if you take one substance and suddenly your numbers jump 10 to 15% in a day, that's remarkable. And it sounds silly. And I've had people go, oh, well, that's not possible. No, it really is possible. I mean, we know that if you increase oxygenation, you can simply do that. And that's actually, it's funny because I'm sucking down my little...
I was curious about that because you actually increase the, people are talking about hydrogen water. You're talking about oxygen water. Like you got 20 something ppm of oxygen in the water versus like standard 8. We have, I think, something to do.
Yeah, actually, this is this is sort of the amped up new version. So we're close to 100. So,
oh my God.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Well, it's a lot of things can change partial pressure, just temperature, right? So at room temperature, you can hold 7.5 to 8 ppm. At 0 degrees Celsius, you can hold 14.6, right? So you just have to kind of figure out what you're doing, what gases are kind of nascent in the stuff, and how you modulate them. But honestly, this is like my favorite hack lately because I drink this stuff like it's going out of style because you can work out, and when you're completely exhausted and winded, you hammer back one of these, and then like 10 to 15 seconds later, boom, done. And also your pulse ox and your heart rate shift as well. So what I've seen is sometimes it's both, but generally speaking, with athletes, your pulse ox goes up to 100. With most people that are older, their heart rate drops. I think it's kind of basically looking to assess biologically whatever the homeostatic balance is that's best for your cardiovascular system. So if it needs to take strain off of your heart, it takes the strain off of your heart. If it needs to upregulate oxygen carrying capacity, then it does that. And it's just, but it's so good because you hammer those things back and you can do things that you wouldn't normally do. And also truly we're at a deficit. Our biology was designed for 21% oxygen. And
Right.
now we're at 19% oxygen in the atmosphere. So we're literally running at a 10% deficit against where we should have biologically originated. And you see that, I think. I mean,
But
you work on your mind all the time. So it's not going to affect you as much. But the average person who isn't pushing themselves and trying to cognitively do anything or working athletically or anything like that, they're at a horrible deficit, you know?
yeah, yeah, I've been thinking about this principle, and I do agree with that. But if we look back on the biological aspect of human being and genetics, normally we're supposed to adapt and to adapt our system to that depletion. Is it because the depletion of oxygen was too fast for our generations to adapt?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So basically, that shift has happened over just a couple of generations. Now, I won't say that we've adapted, but I will say that definitively we've compensated. If you go back and look at historical rates of respiration, right? Say the turn of the last century, in 1900, people were respiring maybe 6, 8 times a minute, as opposed to 14 times a minute now. So we've really compensated for the reduction in the oxygen just by going,
Yeah.
it's kind of like in a consistent state of panting, and that I don't think you're right though. Genetically, we're built to adapt, which is one of my favorite parts about the whole organism.
Darwinism. Yeah.
Yeah, it's remarkable in terms of just its ability and adaptability. But the shift, when it happens too quickly, you can't keep up, right? You can epigenetically alter things, but just to really fundamentally shift things, if you look at, say, the different haplogroups of people who are from the tops of the Andes or the Himalayas, like you can actually genetically see that they're different than we are, right? And they have different oxygen carrying capacities, and that's at a very fundamental level, but that's occurred literally over thousands of years and dozens and dozens and dozens of generations.
Correct.
I think given time, we'll certainly adapt to that. Hopefully we can actually do that and do something a little bit more. But the problem really, even aside from the physical component, is the neural component is, I think, where it really hits you, because your brain accounts for 2.5 to 3% of your body mass, but it consumes 20 to 25% of your.
Exactly. Yeah.
So if you feel like you're running, I mean, if our respiration rate has had to almost double to compensate, what do you think has happened to people neurally?
Yeah.
It's almost, I don't know if you've ever read any mathematicians or scientists from, the late 1800s. I was working on a project and I started to get into quaternion and higher topological algebras and quaternions and octonions. And I went back and I started reading and I thought, what the hell is this? How was I never exposed to this? This is like brilliant. And that I felt so outclassed. They were just operating, and they were doing it by hand. They didn't have any computers or calculators.
Yeah.
And it was so well thought through. I mean, just the kind of I don't know if it's the apparatus that was functioning differently because of the extra oxygen, but just
Yeah, I don't know, because I think that humans from today probably think faster than humans from the past, but maybe more superficially than before. That could be it.
Yeah, I'd say that's actually probably very true. Well, also the pace of things, the pace is very different now. Like I'm a big believer in, doing neurofeedback and organization. And that's, I'd say if there's one thing that I could tell people to do that will qualitatively change their entire existence, without a doubt, it would be meditate.
Of course. Yeah. But, we're getting there, because look at our society. If you go back like 25, 30 years from today, a very low percentage of people were doing meditation, and they were considered like kind of idiots.
Very granola, very French.
You're probably vegan.
Yeah, and I completely agree.
But today you see students, they have meditation, and even kids, they have meditation in classes. So it's getting there. Our society finally understood that meditation changes our brain and make our brain better functional, but also makes people better.
Yeah,
Which is a great thing.
that is a great thing. That's probably the most beautiful component of it is I think at the end of the day, it's hard to find somebody who really consistently meditates that's a total jerk. You know,
You know, it's true.
not to say that there aren't some, I'm sure there are, but
Probably, yes.
and most of the guys I know that have been consistently meditating, you know, men and women for decades, they all have a very relaxed air about them. You know, they don't feel like they're completely pressed. And one of the things I always used to say when I would either teach meditation or just talk to people about meditation is once you start doing it consistently, it really changes your life. It kind of pulls you out of the mire of the swamp and you kind of feel like you're glossing above the surface and just effortlessly moving. But when you want to do it the least is probably when you need it the most. You know, when you feel absolutely stressed out.
Yeah, I have no time. I can do it. This is what you should do it. And it's not really related to the fact that when you do meditation, actually, you have a better sleep. And now we know that, you know, remember, like years ago, when you were a rock star, it's because you were not sleeping. You're a killer, a super businessman, and not sleeping at all during the week. I'm working 24 hours a day and I sleep 1 hour a week. Now, if you say that, you're just like a loser.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally true. You know, the other big change that I've noticed is I was at a meeting yesterday and it was a big venture capital firm and a bunch of other guys with one of their investment companies. They're putting together this huge fund and the conversation turned to psychedelics. And of course, I was kind of blown away, but literally damn near everybody there was like, oh yeah, me too. Me too. I've tried.
Microdosing. Yeah. I think that microdosing brings a lot. Psychedelics, you know, neuroscience, look at John Hopkins. They're coming up with new publication and showing that, like, it's good for the brain. I think that today, Australia or New Zealand, one of those two countries, just authorized shrooms and all type of psychedelics as medicine.
Well, one of the things, one of the guys had done a protocol that was for PTSD related things, and it was with Ibogaine and then 5-MeO DMT.
Oh,
and you do them 1 month apart. The thing that he told me that was the most compelling is the cohort that he had gone through with had 2 Navy SEALs that went through with him, and they would give them a cognitive battery of exams beforehand. And the guys who were the SEALs, and SEALs are generally very bright guys, but on this particular cognitive battery, they both scored around the 25 percentile range. Then after, which is pretty low, then after the first run of the therapy, they came back and they did the same test again. They got 50%. And then the third time they went through, literally, they both had a perfect score. And he said that in talking to them, they were kind of blown away by how many neural connections they were making. They said, you know, before I couldn't do this, now I can do this. I couldn't remember this, now I can remember this. And I think there's kind of, maybe it's a function of sort of priming the pump neurally, where you have to, if you don't, you know this from just neurogenesis, right? If you're trying to trigger neurogenesis, what I always tell people is learn something entirely new. Your brain pumps out the neurons every day, but it's going to synaptically prune them because they're so resource consumptive, unless you force yourself to learn something new and you put yourself under cognitive load. And similarly, if you have a pathway that everything you've done in your life is firing down, well, there's no reason to expand the pathway, right? But if suddenly you trigger it with, say, psilocybin or ayahuasca or ibogaine or 5-MeO DMT, something like that, that opens up an entirely new part of the cortices, then, you know, hey, your brain goes, oh, wait a second, we've got additional resources we can tap. Let's try that. You know, now it's just, that's a hypothesis, but it seems interesting to me that, one, we know that certain types of mushrooms do trigger neurogenesis at a rate that's much higher.
Yes, yeah.
And, you know, if you're doing things where you have an outcropping of BDNF and NGF1 that are getting grossly outpaced when people consume some sort of mushroom, that's worthy of noting. That's actually one of my favorite things about the carbon 60 thing that I made called Neural RX is the studies showed that the rates of new neurogenesis were 2 to 3 times faster than what your body would normally do with BDNF and NGF1. And again, that's great if people are at a cognitive deficit because they're constantly kind of trying to put themselves under load just to have a normal existence.
So
the rest,
yeah, go.
well, for the rest of us, you actually have to learn something new, right?
Yeah. So one of the questions that some people could have in these circumstances is like, as you said, for people that have cognitive deficiencies or loss of memories or things like that. So you can multiply that by 2 by 3 and it's an improvement to go back to what I call normal. For normal people that are already functional, or even worse, for ADHD people that are like hyperactive, part of certain part of their brain, is there a risk to activate those neurons or to generate more neurons? What do you think?
There is.
Yeah.
So now I think the body has some kind of inherent wisdom that's sort of brilliant though, and it will upregulate and downregulate things once it has the energetic profile that allows it to do that. So none of the things I make really are designed to trigger a certain thing or do a certain thing. Almost everything is set up so that I'll target one specific area of your physiology and say, okay, if I'm trying to work on the brain, how does that function? What do I need to give the body so that it can work at its optimal capacity? Because the body really is what dictates it, because everybody's so different that if you just do kind of the Western allopathic thing of we're going to make one molecule and we're going to hit you like a hammer with this one molecule.
Magic pill. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I don't buy it. I think, like, case in point in the serum that Neural RX, the idea there was it was designed for people with Alzheimer's. And so when I looked at Alzheimer's, I assessed it and said, okay, how does this disease work? And at the end of the week, when I first assessed it, I thought, well, damn, it's not a disease. It's just a protective mechanism.
Yeah.
And okay, if that's the case and your body's actually trying to help you, but this is the untoward side effect that you see 15, 20, 30 years down the road, how do we combat that? And one of the things was to try and take away just impedances in the body and allow the lymphatic system to purge the brain more fully. Because if you think of it kind of like rocks or something, right? Your brain takes some sort of exogenous threat like mercury, and it wraps it in a tau protein or an amyloid beta plaque and packs it away so that it doesn't cause damage. Something endogenous like P. gingivalis in your mouth, because it's proximate to your brain, it does the same thing. It doesn't want to get hurt, so it packs it away. Well, over decades of doing this, you end up with these basic little folder clusters of sticky plaques and proteins. And if they're there, they're going to include or occlude signal function, right? You can't have this signal transduction you get. So I put in proteolytic enzymes that would go past the blood-brain barrier and literally eat those components. And so it breaks them down. So at night when you sleep, your body triggers the lymphatics and you aggregate the brain with interstitial fluid and cerebrospinal fluid. So every day you purge these little particles out. And so in aggregate over time, every day that you do that, you end up with a brain that's more similar to what it was when you were before. Yeah. And so over time, you get back to that point. And simultaneously with that, you're pumping out new neurons at a faster pace. So you're trying to upregulate yourself around the deficits and the occlusions that you have neurally. And then one of the other big components is, again, just dropping inflammatory response in the brain, which actually I think this is just my hunch. With people that have ADD and are overstimulated a lot, and a lot of that I think is because it's not actually too much energy. It's kind of like the way somebody would be flailing about if they actually were at a deficit. If you put somebody in the water and you take away their oxygen, they're flailing around. But if they have all the resources they need, they can do things in a way that works more effectively. My youngest son, I've been giving him the Neural Serum for quite a while now, and I started it when he was 14 because he was having some cognitive issues. He's a brilliant kid, like loving to death, brilliant kid, just got a full scholarship.
Thanks.
Yeah, he is. I mean, he becomes to the lab all the time, and he does all of our 3D printing.
Yeah, and you cannot fake genetic.
Yeah. He's a good kid, very bright, but having some cognitive difficulties because I think it was a bit too much distraction and things like that. But put him on the original iteration of the serum, it wasn't quite in the format it is now. Now he takes the same neural serum and he comes in. This is how you know something's good. If a teenager goes out of their way to come in and go, "Hey, Dad, I need to get some more of the serum." You know, that's
this is what he said it down.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for the sponsoring.
Yeah. Oh, that's the thing. 3 years later, he's still doing that, and he'll be actually
that's cool.
Yeah, 6 months he'll be 8, and he still comes by the lab and picks that up all the time. And it's I think I noticed a huge shift right out of the gate, just because it was like he kind of rebalanced, and I think a lot of that is inflammatory response.
Correct. Yeah.
And if you deal with that, it helps everybody. So you provide more energy, you take away the agitation. That's to your point about, is there a risk? Yeah, there are a lot of times when people will say, "Hey, I've got ADD, or I have this inflammatory condition or something like this. Should I take your neural product?" And I said, "No, don't take Elixir," which is that's just basically an MCT bound to a lipid or a lipofullerene. It's the this stuff. They're very pretty.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we're going to list all these products anyway in the link to your website and your research. Yeah, definitely. Those are great. And so the buildup of a superhuman is not possible. What you're doing is you're building up the optimal human, correct?
Yeah. What's interesting about that is the optimal human and what we would consider superhuman are probably very similar.
Yeah.
Because I can tell you matter of factly, if you take the Olympic serum, you can literally lift so much weight, it seems like a joke. I mean, 4 45-pound plates on each side for incline press for reps. I mean, literally, things that seem bizarre.
Yeah.
Very, very hard. If you're not tremendously athletic in doing that thing, I've seen people do that. I've taken video of people doing that because it's just remarkable. But the thing is, in the case of that, what's happening is it's not superhuman. It's just you're tapping out all of the the sarcomeres in the muscle, right? You're, instead of firing 25 to 30%, which is where your brain normally downregulates your
and even if you're a big pusher and dedicated to sport, you're going to stop at 60 anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
Imagine what would happen if Usain Bolt got another 40%. That thing is, it's not superhuman, but to us that would, he'd be running probably a slightly sub 3-minute mile or something, if he could do it continually.
But
I mean, it's not superhuman, but the optimal version really to us would appear that way.
Yeah. Well, some animals can run at 60 miles per hour and they have the same type of muscle we have. So why not pushing the boundaries of what we're capable of doing it? I try to explain that as well on calisthenics. Like people, I'm an old guy and I'm doing all these planches and stuff like that. Right. It's like, how'd you do that? No, I'm not taking a supplement for that. It's just like you condition yourself to get there. One question I have for you on that side is, okay, so we're pushing boundaries by getting more into the cell, more oxidation, I would say, to make it simple.
Right.
Do you think, or do you feel that pushing these boundaries would make the biology, the cell in general, getting older faster? This innocence.
No, actually, I think just the opposite. I think that our body responds under stress, like hormetic stress, right? If you put your body under load, whether it's going into an infrared sauna and then jumping in a cold plunge, or whether you're doing hyperbaric oxygen therapy and then hypoxic training, right? Where you're taking yourself to the extremes. One, you're running at altitude. One, you're flushing yourself with oxygen. All of those things, our body is this brilliantly adaptive system. I don't actually think it ages you more. I think if anything, it's exactly the opposite of that. When you put yourself under load, your body responds. And some of the things there, one of the things with carbon-60 that I found interesting was there was this old Indian ceremony. It's called a puja, which is kind of the ceremonial thing. And it was the Agni puja. And one of them was it meant to increase a person's lifespan if they ate prasad. And prasad is kind of like the holy remnants that are left over after puja. And so what they would do is they would take coconut charcoal and they would put that ash and they would burn it around this little Shiva lingam. And then they would pour ghee, clarified butter over it, right? Short chain fatty acids. And then that would bind and then they would eat the prasad. Well, there's a fraction of carbon-60 in that. So I know it's what they're doing is they're knocking oxidative stress out at the cellular level. And the lore about that particular thing was that it would allow someone to live 2 cycles or roughly 200 years, which sounds, what we would normally think is ridiculous, but it's not. I mean, my laboratory animals lived 93% longer than they were supposed to. So yeah, I mean, I think at this point, as far as I'm aware, I still hold the record for longest extension of a mammalian lifespan because my P53 knockout mice lived 93% longer than they were supposed to, which was remarkable. And given P53s are the mice you use in oncology, so they have the P53 tumor suppressor gene extracted. And what was really remarkable was that those guys weren't dying of tumors. Normally they idiopathically present, so they just randomly get tumors all over their body. These guys didn't get that. They just died of old age. And, it was very, very different, but it was such a pronounced outcome that I thought, wow, this merits me really taking some time and focusing on this.
Yeah. But actually, it seems to be quite ambitious. 150, I do think that our generation can get there.
Yeah, I think actually, yeah, probably pretty easily. Just with the tech that we have currently, I think we could do that. Yeah. I would be surprised if we wouldn't be able to pass the 200 mark pretty easily.
Yeah.
The question there is, nobody wants to live in a degraded state. So how far can we push it so that we're youthful and strong and healthy?
Right. And that brings me back to the question I had before, actually, where, we want to live longer. And some scientists are convinced that the number of cycles per cell is limited. So if we're pushing cells to reproduce fiber in muscles to reproduce themselves, more mitochondria, to a certain extent, if that is true, we're going to go to the burden or the limit and say, hey, I have no more, less. What do we do? Oh, you die.
Yeah, I don't really believe that. And I think the evidence would bear that out. So I know from Dave Sinclair's stuff, Dave's shown that, you can roll the clock back with Yamanaka factors.
Yeah, I saw that.
And as long as you're careful with the Anka factor and you don't trigger, some sort of tumorigenic behavior, you're golden.
Yeah.
You have to do it without that. And in he used a viral vector to distribute that systemically and then trigger it with an antibiotic, so that it's something that you wouldn't normally be exposed to. I think he triggered it with amoxicillin. And that's a viable approach. There's a fellow who's a cryobiologist named Greg Fahey. That's a really brilliant guy, in my opinion. And I think Greg's probably the best cryobiologist in the world. And he came up with technology to freeze organs so that you can actually freeze them and ship them anywhere and reuse them. And he's kind of in process with that, but he has a thymic regeneration technology where he's showing the effects of aging being reduced and actually rolled back. And then there's, Todd Ovakaitis, who does a lot of work with very small embryonic-like stem cells, which I do all the time in my own lab.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I actually have a procedure tomorrow morning. So,
Nice. Okay. Because I see many people now getting into the stem cell procedure. At the beginning, it was like kind of controversial because some scientists in the community were saying like, you're going to trigger cancer. It depends where the stem cell is going to end up and you don't know. But it seems to be very controlled now.
Well, yeah, and I think there are a lot of things you can do that mitigate the risk factors. Like on the cancer front, I have zero risk about that because some of the compounds that we've isolated here in my lab, and so I no longer worry about that at all, and just kind of go to town with the V cells. The other thing about V cells that's intriguing to me is they're embryonic-like because they have no telomeric degradation, so they're effective day zero. So the question about, is the Hayflick limit the penultimate on the cell life, and does that really determine, where we end? Well, maybe it used to be deterministic, but now, knowing that we can take day zero stem cells and kind of proliferate those things and then just pump them back in our body, it's not
Yeah.
that's not the answer anymore.
Yeah,
Mm.
exactly. Yeah,
You know,
reversing the clock.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot to that. I'm loving the aging process. I just was in a really horrific motorcycle wreck like 4 months ago,
No
and
way.
oh yeah, yeah, I
How did you
basically am
do that?
miles an hour. Yeah, and my femur, I split my collarbone in half, and my femur ended up inside of my tibia. So
Oh,
yeah, the femoral condyle actually punched through the top of the tibial condyle, went down 1 inch, and split my tibia.
come on, that is peaceful.
It was it was actually bad when I kind of came to laying face up in a ditch. I kind of did my systems check and thought, okay, neck not broken, great. Tried to move my right arm and it flopped because the bone was completely split in half. And then I went all the way down, and when I got to my left leg, it went out and then off. And it was not the most pleasant of things. But it actually, the bad part was when I got taken to the ER. Luckily, a kid driving by saw me in the ditch and stopped and asked if I needed an ambulance. But I said, yes, I do.
Yeah,
Nope.
kind of.
Yeah, they picked me up, and I was on the bumpiest ambulance ride ever for about 30 minutes getting to the hospital. And so when I got there, they took me in and they said, okay, we've got to take you in for an X-ray. So the two guys, the orderlies, take me in, and I'm on the gurney, and they were trying to pull me off, and they hooked my foot on the side of the X-ray, and it was actually a CT scanner, and it went and off out of the bone. And I don't know that I've ever actually felt anything quite like that, and I think I probably responded in kind. But yeah, when the orthopedic surgeon came in and was looking at the scans, he goes, well, this is strange. Your bone was inside of the other bone, but now it's not. Has something happened?" And it is. Yeah, it is. Absolutely did. But all of that to say that the way I rehabbed myself, he told me at the hospital, the orthopedic surgeon said, look, this is a horrible break. We're going to have to slice your leg open, put you back together with pins and plates and screws and
Yeah.
bone filler in and all this kind of stuff. And I said, I really, that's the best we've got. And he's like, yeah, it's a bad break. Everything's really, it's crushed in. It's a lateral tibial plateau fracture. There's no way to fix that. And you're going to have the surgery. And I thought, nah, sorry, I don't think so. So I called my staff and said, guys, go buy a hospital bed and set it up at the lab. So they set up a lab, set up the bed at the lab. And then they came and kind of rescued me from the hospital the second day. And literally, they took me out off of the gurney like a wounded dolphin in bed sheets, and it slid me into the back of a Toyota Sequoia, and then drove me here to the lab and put me on the hospital. And I did V cells, lasers, pulse electromagnetic fields, the quantum block, hyperoxygenated water because I couldn't get in the hyperbaric chamber. Literally every modality that I could think of. And I was doing it in cycles. I think probably the most effective would be the PEMF and the C60 because it was systemic and it was reacting to inflammatory things. But the PEMF was great. Like I alternated. I actually used the pulse centers unit, which is got a really intense coil, and I used the veterinary unit for horses. So
Oh my God. Okay.
I put it on my leg, and I would alternate, 45 minutes to an hour on my leg, and then I'd shift it up to my collarbone. And it was kind of surprising. After a week, when I went back to the orthopedic surgeon, I had to convince him to give me X-rays because I was moving my arm around, and he said, no, there's no way. You can't have any radiographic healing. Like, it'll just look the same. There's no point. He said, you're just feeling a dip in inflammatory response. That's why you're able to move it. I said, no, I really like the x-rays. And he was like, it's pointless. And I said, it's my dime. I'm paying.
That's it. Yeah.
Right.
The beauty of America.
Yeah. So, but grudgingly, he sent me down the hall to get the x-rays. And then he came back, 10 minutes later with his iPad and went, do you see this? Look at this. This is new bone. And the bones had actually shifted back into position, and I already had new growth connecting them. And I'll send you the x-rays. It's kind of
true. Yeah, that is like crazy. Just for shooting bucking. Yeah.
Well, the thing was, I have a couple of my friends, they're very much in the biohacking space. Katie Wells, Wellness Mama, Chip and Biohacker Todd. They both told me, matter of factly, they said, look, Todd had done it with his daughter Hannah. She had broken her arm. Literally, it was at a 90-degree angle. And in 5 days, it was mended with no sign of fracture. Now, granted, I think at the time Hannah was 6. So you have a lot more growth factors and a lot more things happening. And the rapidity heals a lot better at that age. But still, 5 days, that's insane.
Yeah, that's insane. Yeah.
Yeah, Katie had the same thing happen. It was 9 days to being completely healed for a fracture. And so I thought, okay, I better do it. In fact, actually, I'm sitting on a PIMF mat right now.
You are? Yeah. Okay.
It's that's the thing, is it's a great modality. It's not something that, that I developed. Sadly, it's a brilliant idea. I wish I had come up with it, but it's a great modality, so I try, like use what I can and recommend what I can, like hyperbaric. Great.
Hyperbaric is probably one of the big paths of the future in everything. Like we're saying that. The question about those fractures and recovery and everything. What about pain management?
Well, let's see. So a while back, I developed a type of non-addictive opioid, which came in kind of handy. But mostly, they prescribed hydrocodone. And I took, I want to say maybe 5 or 6 of them, and I really did not like it. It felt, I wanted to feel what was actually happening. And the couple times I took it because I was trying to sleep, and I would roll over and inadvertently bash my leg and kind of wake myself up. So I took it, 5 or 6 times. But what I found was really peculiar is I felt like mentally I was fuzzy, and it wasn't a feeling I really liked. And then I think the very last time I took it, I started itching, and I got a really bad reaction to it. And so I, of course, had read about that. And one of the things that can happen is sometimes people get that and it's persistent. And I thought, okay, God willing, this stops. I'm never touching that again. So it was pretty quick. But the pain management part, I actually, and it's not that I'm, masochistic. I wanted to be aware of what was actually happening with the body.
I think it is important. It's part of it's part of the process of recovery.
Yeah. Your body gets inflamed. You don't want to take aspirin constantly and swell rank like once, because that's how your body knows what to fix.
Exactly. I broke only one. The first time of my life I broke one bone was the femur, but it was not like as bad as yours. But that was like, anyway, it was on the 29th of December, and I was convinced, and I was jumping on snowmobile, but I was convinced that I had no issue because I never broke anything in my life, but the femur was broken, and I stayed 11 days with the broken femur, going from hot tub to sauna to things like that, trying to recover. And I was convinced that I was getting better. My father-in-law is a doctor, and he was like, nah, your bone is broken. You need to go to the hospital.
Well, you probably were. I mean, just flooding yourself with heat shock proteins and cold proteins. I mean, yeah, I'm sure you were triggering a lot of stimulating growth factors and all that sort of stuff. I mean, that's what happens is when you do that sort of hormetic stress, when you put yourself under that kind of consistent load hormetically, your body starts pumping out all sorts of growth factors, extracellular matrix, this and that, and exosomes start proliferating. And I mean, you're in great shape. very quickly. If you had pulsed electromagnetic fields, if the break is so bad that it's separated, it's a little difficult because you do have to do some things to move it back.
Yeah, they put 3 bolts at the end. It's still there. They have.
Well, Western medicine is great at some things. Like you're really, really good at some things and really bad at others.
Actually, it's the condition of your brain, how it works. Feeling the pain is part of the process. I would chew on that 100%. And the recovery is the other part where we are in a world of assisted people. So most of the time when somebody breaks a bone or goes through a surgery, it's some sort of trying to get the attention of others that makes the recovery very slow. And it's their mindset. It's not their body itself. Like you said before, our body is made to adapt, to change, to progress, to neurogenesis, connection.
Well, even taking it a step farther, it's kind of like when we very first started talking that the quantum effects, if you're waiting for people to notice that you're damaged and you're wanting some sort of kind of wound currency where, they're interacting with you because of the damage, you're going to go more slowly. If you really genuinely want to be healed, you can accelerate the healing cycle remarkably. I mean, I have no doubt that all of the stuff I was doing made a huge difference, but there were still some factors that weren't exactly normally explainable.
It's your mindset that triggered that, probably. I get.
And I would be willing to say, it is the mindset that triggered that. Because my view of reality is that most of those interactions on a subatomic level are primarily probabilistic. So the probability that I get repositioned and remanifested, millions of times a second in a broken capacity is likely, but it's not absolute. And there is the small chance that, lo and behold, my bones might actually, in the span of just a few days, reposition themselves exactly where they needed to be so that they could regrow. And as fate would have it, that's
that's awesome. That's like, now we need to teach people to be
and
people.
It was actually, I was, as much as it was a bit painful, I was very happy with two things. One, I got to really kind of walk the walk or limp the limp, as the case may be. Because, I'm always talking about how you can do these different things and accelerate this and that and work on the modalities intracellularly and exhibit better profiles energetically. Well, when you're completely broken, that's the perfect time to do that, right? And it's demonstrable because, I was told, matter of factly, 12 weeks before you can put any weight on your leg. Well, at the 9-week mark, I had the all clear, the bone was completely redone, and I was walking. And so that's a far cry from 12 weeks before you can put any pressure on it. And so the proof's really in the pudding, right? If you have the opportunity to walk the walk. The other thing that I was really pleased with is, I didn't get despondent, in terms of kind of the mindset of having a horrific injury like that. The thing that actually was overwhelming was I was hit with, and I will try not to cry while saying it, but I was just overtaken by so much gratitude for how many people helped and how many people came to, tell me, we love you, we'll do whatever, here we are. One of my best friends texted me and said, "Hey, heard you were in an accident. Don't tell me not to come. I'm already in town."
But you attract people because of who you are. That's the principle of our life. Is like, if you were nasty with everyone around you, you would be like just alone with your broken bones.
I'd still be limping.
The one way come to recover or to pick you up. That's, this is what you reflect is what you're gonna get as simple as that. And many people tend to forget that, but
it was
of course.
Yeah, if you had seen me on the first couple of days, you would have thought that I was crying from the pain, but that certainly that was not the case. I literally kept realizing, and it was consistent, how many people were reaching out and showing up just because they cared. It truly was. It was overwhelming. I couldn't, my little heart could not quite handle all of it. Because, at the end of the day, that's the most important thing, I think, for longevity, is not how long can you get the organism to last. It's how long do you want to be here, because you have connections and people you love. And
you count and they count. Like, yeah.
I mean, that's one example. Yeah. Factors in the blue zones, on all 5 of the blue zones, everybody has some sort of, interpersonal relationship with other people. They have a social group. They have people that they love and that they care about. I think left in isolation, you'd probably be like, yeah, whatever.
I keep my leg like that. Yeah, so you can't even do that.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's a beautiful conclusion. Would you like to add anything else? We're going to put all the links. I will do a video with this story. Like, you should do like a video of that moment of your life.
Yeah, I may do that. We took a lot of X-rays, and there were a lot of people here, and they did actually, they recorded, some of the guys on my team were recording a lot of it, because it was kind of humorous that the way I was approaching it is, I wasn't really bummed out. I was just kind of like, oh, okay, cool. Let's try it. It's worth the experiment. I did 7 rounds of V cells, I think, in 6 weeks.
Wow.
And, just because, well, I mean, I needed to, right?
Yeah.
I was trying to get all the growth factors. And I think one of the things that was really good is that, rather than injecting myself with bone filler to fill the void where the femoral condyle had punched in, it actually fixed itself, and that's, that was a big plus. And I don't know that would have happened without being able to use stem cells to try and get those, things to fix up in the way they did.
It'd be nice to deep dive into that, and to maybe start to do some studies on the research level to see if that is an open door for new type of therapy.
Yeah, well, yeah, you're welcome to come down to the lab anytime. Seriously, open invitation.
Yeah. Oh, I appreciate that. I'm gonna take you on that for sure.
Okay. Yeah, do. By all means. Yeah, just call me. We'll trade numbers, and you can call me and set something up. Welcome to come down. So I love it when people get to come down here, because it's cool to finally meet you like this, but there's still that kind of interpersonal dynamic that you get in the same room. So,
and I'm coming from labs. My studies were there. My first job was in pharmaceutical industry, for going to others, and I still trade with lab, because I'm making freezers for laboratories.
Well, you love this place. It's actually, it's kind of like a playground of sorts. We've got all kinds of crazy gear here, and I have one whole component that's a metal fabrication facility, and when I don't have something, we actually make it. So, we've got electronics and chemistry, biochemistry, metal fabrication, like pretty much anything I need to scratch the itch of what I'm trying to solve that particular week. So yeah, you're more than welcome, Jean. I'd love to.
I'll take you on that. I'm gonna visit you for sure, and it's gonna be this year, guaranteed.
Yeah. Anything else I'd like to add? Just is not in a very Pollyanna sense, but just like, everybody be kind to one another. The world's in a spot where it could use a lot of love and light, and it starts with us. So yeah.
So inspiring. You are inspiring. I love these discussions like that. This discussion in particular is just like, we covered so many topics. We talked about so many aspects of life. And at the end of the day, we're human, talking to each other and spreading vibes and atoms.
Well, much love.
Much love. Thank you. And
okay. Well, all right, man. Anything I could do to help anytime, just hit me up.
Thank you so much. Take care, and
see you later. Bye.
Bye-bye.